my main title is Archaeology of the Gods, because in my research, what I've done is we're familiar with gods like Zeus, Poseidon, Neptune. Poseidon is the Greek. Poseidon is the Greek term, the Greek name, and Neptune is his Roman name. Yeah. So these Greek gods, it is said in the texts, in the ancient texts, that they were Egyptian. So this is my research deals with showing were they Egyptian, were they not, where are the texts, and these kinds of things. So Horus falls into this category, you know, and so I would like to start with a kind of artifact analysis. This is it is a piece contemporary with, it's from the 6th dynasty. It's Pepi the First, and it's from the Brooklyn Museum in New York. And what we see really is that he personifies himself as Horus, you know, and it's contemporary. So in my research, what I try to do is also showing the Greek gods, the face of them, the true face of them, because we know in the Greek histories that, for example, you know what Zeus looks like. He has a big beard and all this kind of thing. But if he was Egyptian, he wouldn't have a beard quite like that. He wouldn't be looking like that. So I try to show the true face of the gods, how they really looked. The Greco-Roman gods, if they were Egyptian, we have the archaeology concerning that. So here we see, this is Pepi. Here at the back is his Horus name, which is Mary Tawi. And this is a unique and important piece because he has Horus. He's gone out of his way to put the Horus spoken there. It's not an accident. It's very, I would argue that it's very purposeful why he has placed Horus behind him. We know of another example where Horus is also, there are two inscriptions on this piece. There is this inscription here, and there is another inscription over here by his foot, which we will look at later. And what we see is, first of all, however, is that he's following a pattern and an example as well. So we see that this is Pepi from the 6th dynasty. This is the stela of Pharaoh Jed from the 4th dynasty, and from the 2nd dynasty, Pharaoh Nibra or Ranib. I believe the name comes in both orders, so you might have the Ra beneath or the Ra above. So you'll see in scholarship or in some writings and museums, sometimes he's called Nibra, sometimes he's called Ranib. So we see that, first of all, that Pepi is actually, it's unique, but it's not unique within itself. He's following a pattern which has been handed down. And this is what we see in ancient Egypt, that a lot of the iconography is handed down and passed down from like standards. There is a standard, and that is followed. We see this in the female gods, like Hathor. The representation of Hathor might come down to Isis, and then other gods. They have the same. They worked on the same pattern, the iconography or statues. So here we can see clearer, Mary, Tawi, here, and we see that he's not the only one that has the Horus behind. So, I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with Khefra from the 4th dynasty. So he has the Horus behind, but he doesn't have the Horus name in the back. So that makes Pepi's example unique. And so there is what we want to look into is the personification of Pepi with the Horus. But first of all, I'd like to go through the examples of Pepi's different names, his tutelage. And so this is the same piece that we see from the Brooklyn Museum, and we have we have his name here in the cartouche. So it's Mary, as we see here, Mary Ra. Okay, so there are two of his names on this statuette. We find Pepi's other names together, and we know that, you know, that they identify with him because we have several pieces which have a number of his titles or names, strong names or birth name, and Horus name and so forth together. So, of course, this is a single one where we see Pepi's written here. But on these two pieces, we have three names belonging to Pepi, and not exactly the same. Some of them are the same. In the next slide, we will see. But on this one, basically, is son of Ra, Pepi, or Pepi, son of Ra. This one, he's son of Hathor. On this one, he has a number of names, Mary, Tawi, his Horus name, and then Pepi, son of Hathor. So on this piece, which is quite interesting, it's from a collection of Lady Mix. Budge, Wallace Budge, he writes about this piece, and he writes about a lot of things about Lady Mix, actually, different manuscripts that he speaks about. She had a wide collection of Ethiopian manuscripts, as well as Coptic and ancient Egyptian pieces. So she was a collector, and her husband as well, I believe. So anyway, it's from this piece that we have the various different names here. It's, 3 different names. Horus, the Horus name, and the triple Horus name as well. And so if we look in the next slide, we will see a closer. And this was sold in Christie's, this one. So I'm not sure where it is now, but it was bought by some. And this one is from the book. These other pieces are from the Brooklyn Museum again, like our main piece. These vases. So not very clear, but we can see here. There is. This is in the middle is the Horus, his Horus name, Mary Tawi, and we see in the middle of this one also it has the Horus name here as well. It's a little less clear, and then we have over here we have the triple Horus. You can see the 3 falcons here. Mary, and then the triple Horus is also over here. The bottom piece is more clear here, and then the difference between these 2 pieces is here we have Mary, son of Ra, okay, Mary, son of Ra. And then in this piece, we have, it is son of Horus, son of Hathor, sorry, son of Hathor. And then this one is also Pepi, son of Hathor. So they're almost the same. They have two names which are the same on these vases, but then it has one name which is different on each of them. And then these will identify this one with us. So Mary Pepi the first, whose throne name is Mary, he had, before his throne name was Mary, he had another throne name, and his throne name was Nefer Sahor, which I think is very important because that's the name he was enthroned with. So he was enthroned, his original throne name included Horus. That's important because he, as our title says, he is the personification of Horus. He is Horus. So that's what the purpose of this talk is, to try and evidence that Pepi the First was known as Horus or is Horus. Okay, and so to understand about the personification of Horus is, if you had Horus in your name, you were Horus, or either you descended from Horus or you were Horus yourself. And so that is very, very important to understand, that he had Horus within his name. Okay, so here what I show is just that there are different examples of how the Sa is written in from the early dynasties going down, and then it shows the different ways that it is written on different inscriptions, so that we might see that sometimes it looks different. Okay, so they're the names of Pepi, so we know of a number of his names, pretty much the full tutelage about his names. So here we're going to looking at, there are many sources for Egyptian history which are not used, which are not accessed, okay? And what I've done in my research, by the grace of God, is to look into these sources. So we have, for example, Arabic-Egyptian sources, which are not used. So when the Arabs, Islam invaded Egypt, Coptic Egypt, in the 7th century, they invaded Egypt 35 years after Muhammad had established the Islam. So they invaded Egypt 35 years after. So when they invaded Egypt, after a certain time, they brought historians with them, came to Egypt. And these historians recorded the ancient history of the ancient Egyptians for the Arabs, for their histories, okay? And their histories were recorded. If we look into this data and these manuscripts and this history, their texts that they were using texts, not only oral history. So they were using Coptic texts and Greek texts, which they had found in Egypt, and they recorded. So we know about Manetho. You're familiar with Manetho, I'm sure, right? So Manetho is the Greek historian who writes the fullest king's list that we have from the ancient writers. So he starts from Menes. Well, he gives also some others, but basically he starts from Menes, and Manetho's from the 3rd century BC, and so he names all the pharaohs from Menes, from the first dynasty, what we call the first dynasty, not including the pre-dynasty. and he speaks of all the pharaohs down until his time, which is the 3rd century BC. He misses out only a few names, mostly it is full. So, and then we have other Greek historians like Herodotus, Diodorus. Herodotus was a priest, an Egyptian priest. Contemporary with him was a Greek writer called Eratosthenes. He also gave a king's list or a canon of Egyptian kings. And so the most fullest canons are those of, in the Greek language, that we know is Manetho and Eratosthenes. These are the main ones, okay? But we have others, like Diodorus mentions a few kings here and there. Herodotus in the 5th century BC, he also mentions a few kings and queens. And so, apart from that source, which is very important, I mean, many scholars have studied it, these Arabic-Egyptian kings lists. Many scholars have studied it. Mainly the French have translated them, and some British, Flinders Petrie's disciple, Moray, she studied them. And so they've been studied, but there are also other corpus and other texts which record the ancient Egyptian history, which are the Greek texts, the Greek epics, all right, like we said. They record that many of the kings of Egypt, okay? So, but these texts aren't used. So I've used all this data in order to, that is unused, not only, because today in Egyptology mainly they're using like the epigraphic canons like the Abydos Kings List, Saqqara Kings List, Karnak Kings Lists. These are those epigraphic, or those which are written in stone. They use that in correlation with Manetho's Greek Kings List and all these other Kings Lists which are written by historians. So really today, all the information that we have is basically only from the archaeology and from the ancient Greek historians. But the Arabic texts are ignored, and which are very important and have been said by early Egyptologists, they are very important. Whoever studies them will find out much. That's what Mispero, he said. Whoever studies the Arabic Kings List will find out a lot of information concerning the ancient pharaohs. And also we have the writings, all the Greek writings from Homer, Aeschylus, Herodotus, and all these epic writings, okay? And in all these epic writings, they mention Egypt over and over and over again. So that brings us to our current, that was the foundation just for our current page, because it's a lot of data to deal with, really. So what we see is in the Greek writing...
Sorry, can I just ask?
Please.
So if there's that much history, it's people are not...
Which is not being accessed, yes.
Access.
Yes.
Is there a political reason, or is it because it's just too expensive to look at, or is it not educated people to... Yeah.
Like I said, all these Arabic texts were translated by the French mainly, okay? The British came into that scene, and so some of the British, there are British writers like Sayis, A.H. Sayis. He writes a lot about them. He deals with them a lot. Very good writer, very good scholar. He's from the 19th century. And then we have, like I said, Flinders Petrie's Murray. She deals with it. And there are different scholars, but here and there, they don't fully treat it, you know. And at that time, when they dealt with it, I mean, a lot of these were 19th century scholars, and so late 19th century and so forth. So when they were dealing with it, the knowledge was still fresh, you know, it hadn't been dealt with properly, and even the epigraphic data was just coming in, you know, with the full King's List and more. So the general knowledge on Egyptology when they were dealing with it wasn't full. So they were still working everything out. And then I guess when they just started to focus more on what they could, what they perceived they could know more clearly, and those things. I guess the scholar, there wasn't scholars who were who had that grace to really deal with it, because I mean sometimes you have to be, you see, to deal with scholarship, really you shouldn't have only one discipline. You should be like, at least you should be a linguist, a historian, to deal with these texts, the philologists, so that you can deal with the text on different levels, you know. So one of the issues is the name forms, you know. In the Arabic King's List, it has a lot of name forms which are peculiar or look peculiar, and at first might look completely different from the name forms in Manetho, for example, because they were transcribed, they were Hellenized by a different person. So he used a different methodology, you know, and so the names don't come out the same all the time. And so then when you look at them in different King's Lists, it looks like a different person. And then another issue is that the Arabic King's List, for example, if we say about that one, it's not as full as Manetho. It's very full, but it's not as full as Manetho, and it has many lacuna, many things missing. So you have to really deal with the chronology. So you have to be a chronologist, a genealogist, you know, as well as just an Egyptologist. So you have to deal with all of this, and I guess there wasn't enough, they didn't spend enough time on it. And so you can glean a lot if you study the text, but you have to really bring it together, which is what I'm trying to do with my own scholarship, and also leaning on the scholarship that's already been done, and so to try and identify and say, okay, this scholar was right, you know, and so that is one of the issues. The issue with the Greek texts is scholars have been dealing with the Greek texts. We have a lot of scholars, but the thing is, it's sparse, it's in different places, and it's about, I think a orthodoxy came about, where it was like, you know, we know Manetho, we know Herodotus, you know, these are historians, so they Diodorus, you know, so they dealt with just the plain historians against the epigraphic archaeological lists. And I suppose that in reality they were really they were going the safe route, you know. I mean that was easy.
Don't you think though that your point of origin, i.e. when they were first carved, do you want to get that?
Continue.
The point of origin would be where everything will start. So that is ground zero. And then as different cultures or whatever and years pass and historians are recording, the closer they are to the original event, the more accurate they're going to be. So by the time that the Arabic texts come into play, you've already said they're 7th century that they got involved in this. Over time, it's like Chinese whispers. They can become diluted and they can become abstracted by different cultures as well as different viewpoints. So closer to the actual source, I would have said would be the starting point.
Yeah, I mean it's a good point, but I mean in reality that's not always the case. Sometimes we find the much later material is more trustworthy or has a lot more information that we didn't have in other materials. You know, you find this in manuscript studies all the time. Earlier manuscripts have, you know, it depends on the scribes, you see. But in the case of the Arabic, they were copying. They weren't. We can evidence that they weren't being told this history verbally. You know, it wasn't an oral history necessarily that they were recording. They were transcribing a textual history. So in that case, they were using material which was perhaps, you know, centuries older in the Coptic and in the Greek language. And so they dealt with manuscripts or papyri that they then transcribed into Arabic. So we don't know how old the material was that they were using. And we know as well that there is papyri which are like, you know, a millennia old. So in that context, you know, we really don't know.
Things can be found later that would need to be slotted into the Quran.
And what I would say here is that the Arabic Egyptian canons, for example, have a lot of data that no other texts have. You know, the like Herodotus, Manetho, all them, they were pretty much following one kind of tradition of texts.
Yeah.
And the Arabic Egyptian has a lot of unique data in it, so it's very important. And the Arabic Egyptian text still is kind of a middle ground between the Greek material, not the Greek histories, but the Greek tragedies and
yeah.
There's two Greek sources that we're talking about. One is the Greek historians proper. I mean, they're writing history as history. The others are writing history, but in a poetical manner.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was history and religion both together. You know, so it has
storytelling.
It has lots of nuances in it. You know,
yeah.
And one of the issues with although it's very important. The Greek tragedies and everything. One of the issues with that data, is that the Hellenic etymologies. That's one of the real issues that we have to deal with. You know, like for example, Plato, 4th century BC. He talks about the 6th Egyptian dynasty many times. Without knowing it's the 6th Egyptian dynasty, of course, we have to deal with that. But trying to make etymologies, you see the problem that the Greeks have, and not only the Greeks, other cultures as well, but especially the Greeks, that anything which comes into the Greek language is of Greek origin, you know. So this is the problem that we have. So, and then what we see with the tragedies in relation to ancient Egypt is that we have Egyptian words which are given new etymologies, and then later writers, based on these etymologies, they will form a new narrative or a new poetic angle, you know. So, for example, we'll go into that a little, you know, in the name of what I show this. According to the Greek histories, there is one king of Egypt whose name is Epaphos. Okay, now this Epaphos, they say is Horus. Okay, or the Horus child, or Harpocrates, and we'll go into a little into that. And so they try to say the etymologies that his name is Greek, and it's actually they're saying it's an Egyptian king, but they're saying his name is Greek at the same time, you know. So I mean, we have to look into that and accept or not accept, you know. If it's Greek king, if it's an Egyptian king, then his name must be Egyptian, right?
That's exactly the same between the Greek and the Roman gods. The Greeks have called theirs the same as the Romans have. So you've got Jupiter and you've got Zeus. So you've got Epithus instead of what the Egyptian name was. They've just done the same.
Yes.
Reclaimed another god with a Greek name.
Yes, whether it's a reclaiming or whether they just accept that he's Egyptian, we'll get into that a little as well, you know. I think you have some good points, The problem is when you go into the classics, coming out of Egyptology for a moment, when you're dealing with the classics, the problem is that some scholars, they want to say that the Roman gods are Roman gods and not Greek, and they're not the same as the Greek gods. And then they want to say that the Greek gods are Greek gods and they're not Roman and they're just the Greek gods. But as one scholar says, as one scholar knocks that argument on the head, as we can say, he says, okay then, well, what do you do when Kronos is called Kronos in both, when Oceanos is called Oceanos in both languages, what do you do then? How can you say that Oceanos, the Roman Oceanos, is not the Greek Okeanos? So that argument that they're completely separate gods, the Roman and the Greek gods, is not justified, because many of them have the same names. Of course, some have different names, like Saturn is the Roman name for Kronos, okay? So, Jove or Jupiter is just let's say a corruption of Zeus. It's the same name, because he's Jupiter. We also have in the Greek Zeus Pater, it means Zeus the father, or Father Zeus. So that argument is, and we have to come to that conclusion as well in order to study the Egyptian history. We have to come to that conclusion. Otherwise, we won't get anywhere. So, in order to do the scholarship, we have to be very, very. We have to not make assumptions or presumptions. We have to be very, very careful, and this is the mistake of many scholars. We presume, we're putting our presumptions on things, and we have to let the scholarship and the data do the work, and that's why probably, back to the earlier question, that's probably why they went away and didn't come to any, didn't study these texts more, because they were putting too much of their own presumption, and when you put your presumption, you're not going to come to the right conclusion. So, Ihor, this was the wife of, she had a child with Zeus. Her child was Epaphras. And then she married Telegonos, who was also known as Nilos, who is Osiris. And so this is what we will look into a little to see if what I've just said is justified or not. So this from the Great North Museum, a few pieces from the Great North Museum. So I've studied the incorporated their Egyptology section, which deals with Horus and the Horus family, or the Osiris family. So this is the Osiris. This is piece number 4, number 6, and number 5. But of course, this is Epaphras, according to the Greek histories. So this is why we have this here. And so we're dealing, at the moment, we're dealing with two things. We're dealing with, in the beginning of the talk, we were dealing with the actual pieces, the actual person, their actual contemporary pieces from the second millennium, beginning of second millennium BC, 1900 BC, from Pepi. So we saw his actual face, and so now some of the pieces, like we saw before, was him worshipped as a god, not only as his monuments. So Hellenization, Greek Hellenization, and Egyptian names of Isis, Horus, and Osiris. So one of the things is that we have to go into some of the older scholarship, the foundation scholarship, in order to receive a lot of the data as well. But here, what we see is Ovid. I'm sure you've all heard of Ovid and his Metamorphosis. Ovid was a Roman writer, and his book is Metamorphosis, and in there, in the version or in the translation by Sir Samuel Garth, an Englishman, or let's just say British. I'm not sure if he's Scottish or anything, so let's hold that. So he translates the Greek like Enochites, which means Inachos was the father of Iho in the Greek writings. Inachos was the father of Iho. Inachos was himself the son of Oceanos. Okay, Oceanos, from which we get our word ocean. Okeanos, he was the Greek god. But he was actually a king of Egypt. And so Inachos, he left Egypt and he came to Argos in Greece, and he established the kingdom of Argos. Okay? And so Epaphras, because he descends from Inachos, he was called Enochites. But Sir Garth translates this, instead of calling him Enochites, translates that in his English translation, the son of Isis. So what is the reason for him doing that? You know, identifying him as the son of Isis. Sorry.
Simplification.
Simplification, but also identification. It was well known that Epaphras was the son of Isis, which identifies Epaphras as Horus, because Horus is the son of Isis. So, I'm trying to show here that it's well known in scholarship. This is, you know, but it's not spoken of very greatly. It's not. So that's why I'm trying to bring this to the forefront. So another English writer, I believe Riley, he in his edition of Ovid's Metamorphosis, he says, London, he says that Iho probably came from Egypt. Isis was one of the chief deities of that country, and her worship naturally passed with their colonies into foreign countries. Greece received it when Inachos went to settle there, and from Egypt, and in the lapse of time, Isis, under the name Iho, was supposed to have been his daughter, and is here narrated, as is here narrated by Ovid. So, furthermore, the Greek authors, Apollodorus, Strabo, the geographer, Diodorus, naturalist, historian, Pausanias, say that Iho was the daughter of Inachos and the first king of Argos, Inachos the first king of August, and that by her, Jupiter, that is to say Zeus, had a son named Epaphras, who went to reign in Egypt. They also tell that she married Osiris. So here what we see is that Iho or Isis had two husbands, or two husbands at one point, or different points. One was Zeus, her first husband, or by who was born Epaphras. Then later on, she married Osiris, which is to say that Epaphras is, or Horus, is the stepson of Osiris, not the son of Osiris. And this is what all the texts say, that he's not the actual son of Osiris, but the stepson of Osiris. And so all these are Egyptian personages. This is what we see. When we're talking about Zeus, was an Egyptian king, a king of Egypt, a pharaoh, as was Iho was the queen, and Epaphos was a king. So this is what is being said here by these different writers. All these different writers, because as we say, we've named quite a few now. So this is continued here. We see that as evidence, the Greek sources give the name of the mother of Epaphos as Iho and his father as Zeus. Okay, so from the monuments themselves, you see why, if we first probably considered this, we will say, what is this thing? You know, I mean, Zeus and Egyptians, but this is what the texts say, and we have to follow the data if we want to know what is the result. If we want to find out what is this, you know, what are they saying, we have to follow the data. If we put our presumption on it, we'll never know. We will remain ignorant, you know. And so that's why it's important for us to be very studious, be very humble, and not put our own mind on anything, but always come with a blank mind and let the data to do the work. So on our side, we as researchers, we have to compile that data together and see what it says. So from the monuments themselves, we learn that it was the wife of Teti III. The wife of Teti III. That Iho was the wife of Teti III. Okay? This identification identifies Zeus as Teti III. Okay? Now, Teti, there were 3 Tetis. If we look in the Abydos canons, and we look in also the Arabic-Aegyptian canons, we find there are 3 Tetis. Okay, there is a Teti which is from the 1st dynasty, a Teti in the 3rd dynasty, and a Teti in the 6th dynasty. Teti the 3rd is the Teti from the 6th dynasty. Okay, so in the epigraphic texts, it says that his wife, Iput, okay, they had a son named Pepi the First, which we call Pepi the First. He is the first Pepi. Okay, so the epigraphic texts and the Greek poetical texts or tragedies, epic texts I like to call them, the Greek epics give from thousands of years before we discovered these archaeological findings, agrees entirely with the epigraphic data. Now what we find is that Iho here is a Hellenization of the name Iput. And I'm a linguist, so you know I'm very familiar with how with linguistic change, and especially in the Greek language, for example, you know that they take off the termination of like the Egyptian termination. They will take that off and add their Greek termination on the end. So if it's masculine, they will put us or a few other us or on the end of a word to show that it's masculine. If it's feminine, they might put a. You know, they might take the T off and then they might put a, or they might put e in order to show that it's feminine. So this is the kind of thing that we're dealing with. So in this case, what we find is that the T has been taken off. And then we do find there is some few examples where we can find that Iho in the form of Ipo, or Iopi, or Jopi, or Joppa. Okay? So this is what we find. And if we go into the sources, the Greek sources, the Greek linguists and historians, and if we go into the Roman historians, and if we go into their lexicons, the Greek lexicons, they all agree that the word Zeus comes from the Egyptian Tut. They all agree. All the linguists, the German linguists, like Klug. I don't expect you to know these names, but Klug, he was a very big German linguist. He says that concerning the German word, and then which is cognate or related with the Greek and the Latin. So it is well established that Tut is the original form of Zeus. Okay? So here what we find is another evidence that agrees with that, which calls Zeus Tut. Now, in the Ethiopian texts, we specifically have Zeus called, he's called Pharaoh Tut in the Ethiopian sources. Why we know that is, or King Tut, and why we know that he's called King Tut in the Ethiopian sources is because it gives his daughter's name, the daughter of Tut. And in the Ethiopian sources it says the daughter of this King Tut her name is Aglia. And Aglia, it says, was the wife of Vulcan. Vulcan is Festus. Okay? And they had a child, and that child was called Aethiopis. Aethiopis the first king of Ethiopia, from where Ethiopia gets its name. We're talking now 1800 BC. Okay? So by giving the name Aglia, by giving the name Vulcan, we know that if we go into the Greek sources, that Vulcan was the wife, or Aglia was the wife of Vulcan.